Throughout the European battlefields of the Second World War, German soldiers developed distinct impressions of the various Allied armies they faced. These impressions did not arise from propaganda or hearsay alone, they emerged from trenches soaked in mud, ruined villages echoing with artillery fire, and countless close-quarter engagements where every decision meant life or death. Over time, a curious statement began appearing in German field notes, interrogation reports, and oral testimonies: "Watch out for the Canadians." This statement did not mean that Americans or Britons were considered weak, far from it. Rather, it reflected a growing belief within the Wehrmacht that the Canadian infantry possessed a rare blend of resilience, precision, and unyielding will that made them uniquely dangerous. Understanding why German troops felt this way requires examining not only military history but also the human psychology of combat, the cultural background of the armies involved, and the lived experiences of those who fought on opposite ends of the barrel. The German perception of Canadian soldiers began forming long before the Normandy landings of 1944. The First World War had already etched the name, Canadian Corps, into German military memory. During the Battle of Vimy Ridge in 1917, Canadian units executed one of the most meticulously planned and successfully executed assaults of the entire conflict. The German officers who survived often wrote about the Canadians with a mixture of irritation and respect, describing them as unusually persistent, highly accurate, and unmoved by heavy losses. These descriptors lingered long after the armistice. When the world plunged once more into global war in 1939, many German officers still remembered the stories of Vimy, Passchendaele, and the 100 Days Offensive. Even younger soldiers, who had not been alive during the Great War, heard tales passed down through training manuals and anecdotes from veterans. While official Wehrmacht doctrine rarely singled out specific Allied nationalities as inherently more dangerous, internal briefings sometimes included warnings about the historical tenacity of Canadian troops. These small psychological seeds later blossomed into full-grown battlefield perceptions. By the time the Canadians engaged German forces in Europe during the Second World War, they were no longer untested colonials. Canada had grown into an industrializing nation with a strong sense of civic duty. The army, while smaller than that of the United States or the British Commonwealth as a whole, was built on a foundation of volunteers. This volunteer spirit shaped how Germans perceived them. To a German soldier, who might have been conscripted or simply transferred repeatedly between fronts, the idea that the enemy across the hedgerow had chosen to be there created an unsettling aura. Germans sometimes remarked that Canadian troops fought as if they had nothing to lose, although this was not true. Rather, they fought with the quiet determination of men who accepted hardship as part of their identity. Their training emphasized marksmanship, fieldcraft, and initiative, traits that German infantry valued as well and therefore recognized as dangerous in the enemy. The Dieppe raid of August 1942, though a tactical disaster for the Allies, left an unexpected impression on the Wehrmacht soldiers defending the French coast. Many German machine gunners and riflemen who repelled the assault later recalled being shocked by how stubbornly the Canadian units pushed forward despite obvious defeat. A German infantryman wrote in his diary, "They kept coming even when they must have known the beach was lost. Some fought until they collapsed." Although Dieppe taught the Allies painful lessons, it taught the Germans something else: the Canadians would not break easily. This early conclusion resurfaced repeatedly in later campaigns. When Allied forces landed in Normandy in June 1944, the Canadians were assigned to some of the most difficult sectors. The fighting around Caen, Carpiquet, and the notorious Verrières Ridge became meat-grinder battles where Canadian divisions faced not just regular Wehrmacht units but Waffen-SS formations, including the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, a formation infamous for its fanaticism. German troops in this sector encountered Canadians again and again, and these engagements fed into a consistent impression. German after-action reports often described the Canadians as exceptionally persistent attackers, dangerously effective marksmen, and competent in night movement and infiltration. While such praise was intended for internal analysis, it shaped how ordinary soldiers viewed the Canadians as well. Repeated exposure to the same enemy under harsh conditions tends to amplify psychological impressions. A soldier who had survived multiple engagements against Canadian units was likely to fear facing them again. The nature of Canadian infantry tactics also contributed to their reputation. Unlike the Americans, whose overwhelming industrial power allowed for massive artillery and aerial bombardment preceding attacks, the Canadians often advanced with more modest supporting fire, especially during the intense hedgerow battles of Normandy. Their assaults typically relied on small unit coordination, careful movement, and reliable marksmanship. German soldiers were impressed, and unnerved, by the Canadians' ability to approach quietly, sometimes appearing almost out of nowhere. A Wehrmacht private recalled that, the Canadians arrived without theatrics. They did not shout. They did not sing. They just came and kept coming. This quiet approach contrasted sharply with the stereotypical American style, which German troops often described as loud, confident, and heavily reliant on firepower. The British, on the other hand, were respected for their discipline and steadiness, but their tactics were seen as methodical to the point of predictability. Germans joked grimly that they could set their watches by British artillery patterns. But when facing Canadians, they noticed something less easily categorized. The Canadians seemed neither impulsive nor overly cautious. They were simply relentless. Their attacks did not always have the dramatic flair of an American offensive or the textbook precision of a British assault, but they had something that Germans struggled to define, a quiet, unwavering determination that felt almost personal. German soldiers also noticed that the Canadians rarely reacted to intimidation. Prisoners taken from Canadian units tended to be calm, cooperative, and respectful, which impressed, and sometimes unsettled, the Germans. One SS officer remarked after interrogating a group of Canadian prisoners, "They behaved not like defeated men but like men waiting to return to battle." Such psychological steadiness was rare. German troops, especially by 1944 and 1945, were accustomed to capturing exhausted, frightened, or disoriented enemies. The Canadians' composure disrupted their expectations. Another factor that influenced German attitudes was the Canadians' skill in close combat and sniping. Canadian training placed heavy emphasis on the rifle, and many soldiers came from rural backgrounds where hunting was common. German units often commented that Canadian rifle fire seemed more accurate than that of other Allied troops. Their snipers, too, developed a formidable reputation. In several engagements, German movements were severely restricted by Canadian sharpshooters who operated with a level of patience and precision reminiscent of the best German marksmen. When an enemy mirrors your own strengths, fear naturally follows. The harshest sectors of the later campaigns, especially the Scheldt estuary, the Rhineland, and the liberation of the Netherlands, were further proving grounds for Canadian toughness. These battles were characterized by mud, flooding, cold, and close-range engagements in ruined villages and forests. German soldiers repeatedly faced Canadians in these inhospitable environments and noted that they seemed to endure discomfort better than most. A German corporal described a battle in the flooded fields near the Scheldt. "We were soaked and chilled, but the Canadians looked as if they were born in the water. Whether or not this was true, the perception mattered. Perception is a weapon of its own in war. All of these experiences accumulated into a general belief among German troops that the Canadian infantry was uniquely difficult to fight. It was not that the Canadians were the most technologically advanced or the most numerically overwhelming force. The Americans had far more firepower, the British had vast imperial resources, the Soviets had unmatched numbers and ferocity. What set the Canadians apart was the combination of professionalism, resilience, accuracy, and a quiet, unsettling determination that seemed to ignore fatigue and fear. They did not rely on theatrics or heavy bombardment to break German lines, they simply applied persistent pressure until the line inevitably cracked. After the war, when German officers and enlisted men were interrogated or interviewed, many reiterated the same theme. They often praised American equipment and British discipline but described the Canadians with a different tone, one of respect bordering on wariness. Phrases such as, "the toughest infantry we faced in the West," or "the most persistent attackers," recur in various testimonies. These were not statements made under duress or propaganda influence, but reflections from men who had fought at close quarters and survived. Ultimately, the German respect, and fear, of Canadian infantry reveals much about the nature of warfare. Strength is not measured only in numbers or firepower. It is measured in the resolve of individuals, the cohesion of small units, the willingness to push forward through mud and gunfire, and the ability to remain calm in chaos. The Canadians excelled in these intangible qualities, and German troops, who valued such traits in their own ranks, recognized and respected them in their enemy. In hindsight, the Canadian infantry was not necessarily more lethal than every other Allied force, but to many German soldiers, they embodied the kind of enemy who could not be easily predicted, intimidated, or stopped. Their approach to combat, quiet, disciplined, unwavering, left a deep impression on those who faced them. And so, across the ravaged landscapes of Normandy, the Scheldt, and the Rhineland, a whispered warning circulated from trench to trench: the Canadians are coming. Hold fast.